My posting schedule is a little bit off. In my last video I told you we all had a cold, and also a family member is thankfully peacefully and at an old age is currently transitioning to the next life, and even as I speak that's happening. And so this just sort of changed the ability for this human to turn up and do what it needed to do. However, it leaves me wanting to share on such a major part of the manifestation in life that this human organism is going through and has gone through, and the importance of not creating identities around these events. The majority of people, when I meet them, they have no idea that I'm on the physical still recovering from the damage done to this organism, and the damage is quite severe with my health. And for those who don't know, you see, I won't make an identity out of this. I've made that mistake before. I will not bring the events that are happening to and have happened to the organism into an identity. I have worked on this to liberate myself from that identity of the story of illness. But even as I sit here speaking as this human organism sitting here, this awareness talking, I have that issue. And that issue is so big that had that issue not arose in the body that I am speaking from, I would have, I presume, this human organism would have remained living at the children's village, living in Africa. And so this was an absolute course correction, what happened. And it's important that I discuss that from a spiritual perspective, from a perspective of living in the presence, where you have freedom, where you don't get chained down by the identity. And it's been tremendously difficult to do that because the mind was so programmed by the story of illness that it wanted to always own it and make it this, and it's not. There's no identity around it. It's an arising, a manifestation in consciousness. And there's nothing personal about it, for all it is happening to the human organism. It doesn't have to become that. And this is important if you are sick, or those around you are sick. Because you become impossible for those you love to be around when you do that. Because you make an identity of suffering. And it becomes additionally worse because of the psychological suffering that you are creating by forming that self-image. Now, if you don't know what happened to this human organism, it became very ill. And the organism malfunctioned, the mitochondria of the organism malfunctioned. And this happened after contracting predominantly parasitic illness, malaria 3 times, babesiosis, etc. And it damaged the body because much of it went undiagnosed, except the malaria. And so the vessel was damaged. Now the vessel was guided by God to take time out, recover and heal. The organism was clearly, in the memories I have as this human talking to you, spoken to on numerous occasions by spirit to go and recover and heal. The reason the organism didn't get that chance was the mind had generated an arrogant spiritual ego, a self-image. And that self-image was taking responsibility for the work that God was doing. And in doing that felt immense stress and pressure. The human organism, when it went in the presence of God, it wasn't doing that. As time progressed and it got sick a little, the ego came in and stopped the organism from staying in presence and formed instead a self-image of being in the presence of God based on memory, but not actually in it. And therefore, the anxieties of life were not being cast at the eternal now, the presence of God, but onto the strain of the physical human organism, the vessel, because the mind was making it physical. The mind was saying, I am John, I am responsible for all of these kids. The mind had forgotten that God was responsible and used this human organism that we point at with the term John to do what it had done. And so that arrogance is not of God, it's the carnality. That sense of pride and arrogance, however noble it may seem, but you were trying to help the children, it's still arrogance, and it's still therefore not of God. Any self-mental image you create of yourself is going to do that. It's going to deviate from the will of spirit, the will of unconditioned love for your life, for the animation of your intelligence and the actions of it, is going to be corrupted by the self-image that you hold, no matter what. Even if that self-image is trying to do the same work that the spirit had led the human organism to do. Now the spirit, the will of unconditioned love, can't speak to the organism, because as it does, for all I recall and recollect in the memories I have that it was, the arrogant ego says, no, I can manage, no, I've got to keep going. It lacks faith. The ego lacks faith. And so it knows, no, I can't listen to God's voice anymore. I must do this because these children need my help. Need whose help? They need God's help. And God's help will come through the human vessel that's free of ego predominantly. But the ego was wanting to own it and pushed, therefore, God out of the equation. And that arrogance meant I kept going. The human organism was trapped by the program of the mind, and it kept going. Excuse me. It kept going, and it kept going. And that made the organism very sick. Now, in modern day society, we have a thing called chronic fatigue syndrome. And I have heard people make fun of this, but I know a lady who went for assisted suicide because of the suffering that chronic fatigue syndrome brought her. Because it is not tiredness, it's a shutdown of the cellular energy systems in your body. And the misery of that is quite profound, because sometimes you're too sensitive even for music, even for a screen, even to listen to your loved ones' voices. It's too much. And what happens is the organism pushes too far, and deep down the energy systems of every cell have a thing called mitochondria, and they create ATP, which fuels everything in your body. That malfunctions, and it can no longer produce it as it should. And so when you go too far, the body crashes, as they call it. The vessel stops functioning normally, and there's immense pain as various chemical reactions go offline, and you build up lactic acid in your body, and you get autonomic issues with your heart, and you get headaches, and it's very intense. And this is something that this human organism still faces. They call it post-exertional malaise. But it's the most horrendous thing. When the organism goes into it, the difficulty of living life in that state is horrendous. But it's a million times more horrendous if you identify with it. And so I'm using this video to share, yes, there is a journey. I am combating and healing, and I am fighting in the spirit. I have had assistance, as you've seen, from our angelic friends of blue light who were sent by God. I am healing still the infections which we found out I still had this babesia. It's tremendously difficult to get rid of. And I am also at times going too far due to my arrogance and crashing, triggering this response where the human organism listens to the mind and not its knowing of health. And this is brought on by peculiar things and things I am grateful to learn as the awareness I am. For instance, my child asking me to play football on a day where I know I don't have the energy to do so because I've already done so much. And yet somehow the arrogance still arises. I'm his father, of course I can do that. And I crash, I get sick for several days afterwards. And so this is an extreme journey of learning and healing for the mind as well. Because when we get sickness in the body, most human beings have no idea that I fight that. They have no idea that that is a fight this human organism goes through. Because they don't sense it. They don't sense any, at this time, any self-image of sickness, of being a victim. They sense nothing of it. So when they hear it, they get a surprise. Oh, really? And the beauty is by not building a self-image of it, by not building a self-image of that damage done to the organism, which is going to heal, it is repairing, and it will when it's ready to. When the time is right, when everything is correct, when the soul I am learns to slay all of its dragons and get everything online, it'll come, and I'm happy for that. I've seen it. I know it's so. Likewise, when the angelic beings in meditation healed my gallbladder, and it took nearly 2 months for it to flow into the 3D, it did come, and it will come. But to identify with it severs all of the power of spirit in the life of this human. In my life, my expression in this 3D realm is this human shape. Spirit must move in it for that to have meaning. And if I make an identity of suffering, of being a victim, spirit does not move. And I can do things as this human organism. I clear entities from people, I clean the energy of people. I am still, despite all of that, building what we are, been running the charity, this channel. And it's not through any effort of a persona, an arrogant, I'm tough, look what I did. It's purely by the grace of spirit, and the grace of spirit is able to move in the cells of this vessel. Because the awareness catches the mind trying to make a self-image of the illness and the recovery. And I can say the organism would not be sick had the arrogant spiritual ego listened to spirit long ago. When it was first starting and I was told, take a break, the vessel must take a break, the ego didn't listen. The will of unconditioned love also unconditionally loves this vessel. It didn't listen. Because the hardest thing for the mind is to accept that this form deserves unconditioned love as well, and peace, and health, and forgiveness. And that's the same for all humans. And yet it is so. And this was perhaps the worst thing that ever happened in my life, was what happened to this organism. In the whole memories I have of passing through the roles that Spirit gave this organism, the worst was that. Because I saw relationships fade that had great value. I saw the impact it had on other lives, the impact it had on my own, the opportunities lost interacting with my son, my eldest, when he was small, because the organism was too sick to do so. It was the worst. It still lives as part of the journey, and it will be over. But it had to be fully surrendered as an identity before it could be over, so as I could make progression in the physical and the spiritual. And so if you are unwell, if you are struggling, don't make an identity out of that. Make your identity in the eternal now, which is like, as my wonderful wife said last night, it's like being an awareness at the back of your head, almost above, behind your body. Something different. And it's tough. There's pain. Pain pulls you into the body. But even in pain, I want to set a good example to my children, to my wife. I want them to see how I deal with that as this human organism and as the soul speaking through it. Is to rejoice in my suffering, which can only be done by not having an identity in it. And then you have an identity in the eternal glory of God. And so much so that people you meet don't even recognize that you have still a disability that you are conquering and untangling in your life. And I am confident still that it would be untangled had my arrogant ego, even last year, been able to stay quiet instead of going back to work prematurely. Still, the last year has been a huge journey for the soul I am, to conquer that, to slay my dragon, as Joseph Campbell said. Because again Spirit spoke, do not go back to work. Take time, do not go back to work. I went back to work. Why? Because the arrogant ego, which everyone is wrestling, came back in. I know liberation. I know God's presence. I know God's power. But I am a human, just like you. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of grit to ignore the pain and identify beyond it. And there the joy comes. And you truly do rejoice in your suffering. Even though you're in pain, you feel great. You're like, oh, life's amazing. It's inexplicable, but it's true. And what better time to learn the workings of your mind than when you're sick and you have so much time on your hands. It was a huge blessing in my life, as well as being what I perceive to be one of the worst things. But it all just is. Perhaps when I'm 100 years old and I have a bigger picture, if I reach that, I will look and say, oh, that illness was actually the best thing that happened to me in my life. All I know is, if I identify with it, I lose the presence of God. I lose the capacity to rejoice in my suffering. I lose the power of the Holy Spirit in my life. And I lose hope. And I refuse to let my mind do that to me again. And you should too. I love you all. God bless. Be well. I want to take just a few moments of your time to share with you an exciting project that we have going with the charity for the rest of the year. Before I go any further with that, I want to show you why we are doing this project and who we are helping with it. This child's name is Jane, and we found Jane just 1 kilometre away from where we are building our new children's village, which is a 9-hour drive from our existing one. That area has nobody educating, caring for, or trying to assist children with special needs. Jane's mum has to go to work, and so the only option she felt she had to keep her daughter safe was to peg her to the floor, as you see here. This, of course, is not a way of life for anyone, and Jane has lived that way the whole of her life. What we are trying to do is make sure that we can build a solution that's functional for children like Jane. To do that, we need to raise $200,000 by the end of the year. And to do that, we are hoping to get 2,000 volunteers who will agree to fundraise $25 a month, or if you are blessed enough to be able to share that without fundraising, of course, that's an option, every month for the rest of the year. If 2,000 people can commit to doing this, I know, because I have a working blueprint of the village that we currently have, that I can build a working solution that will be able to provide a loving home for 150 special needs children in that location. I also can say that every dollar will go towards construction. Every dollar. And this is a promise that I know I can make, because after 10 years, I think I'm probably better seated than most human beings to fix this problem. If you want to know more about the project, feel free to reach out, or you can visit the link at the bottom of the screen, www.sharetanzania.com/2000 strong. There you'll find out all the information you need. Thank you for the love and support. We can't do what we do for these children without you. God bless, guys. Bye.